The below 9 video ESL English as a Second Language by Triads C-diagrams. Now we'll do an exercise employing the Triad C-diagram of the college notes and offshoot from the T-diagram of Postmodern Kabbalah. Practice makes perfect in the use of this holistic approach. On this occasion, we'll keep things close to the ground against the backdrop of the Wholeness Principle that all comes in 4 tiers of PaRDeS as 3 in 1 of the Triad. So this is the reference book, as always, Just out on vacation from Austin ISD for the summer, I attended a 3-day PD course on ESL English as a Second Language at Region XIII. All the material used in this video comes from the handbook provided by the Education Service Center, and María, the instructor, was awesome, not a dull moment. So thank them for the material. I am not going to give a 3-day course in 10 minutes. Rather, the idea instead is to neatly order our thoughts on ESL by way of the C-diagram, a closet idea of sorts, which in turn is the postmodern user-friendly version of the 3-in-1 triad of the 4 tiers of PaRDeS. So this is always our starting point. All right, this is always our starting point. The 3-in-1, because it's 3 in 1, okay, or 4 tiers of PaRDeS, or the triad 3-in-1. This is always our starting point. So we're going to give just highlights, short on details, and instead we'll refer you to the course notes themselves, focusing our attention on the big picture view of things. Essentially, the first day covered the thoughts of Stephen Krashen on second language acquisition, and then of Jim Cummins on social and academic language, and lastly on Mac Halliday on systemic functions of linguistics. Let's upfront spread out the scaffolding schematics that we'll be using in this endeavor. Our home base, as we said, is a T-diagram of the 3-in-1 triad of the 4 tiers of PaRDeS. This is our home base. So from the home base, we're going to project to the C-diagram. And what we're going to do is here, the 1 is going to correspond to this part of the C-diagram. The 2, which is the derage, will be the spirit or the issues. The number 3 will be the summary or the mind, and number 4 will be the body or the bunch of notes that we have. As we said previously, the C-diagram has many advantages over the cryptic T-diagram when it comes to taking notes. This is awesome for deeper stuff, but if you want to take notes or organize your thoughts in a closet, so to speak, this is probably better, Okay, so the C-diagram for ESL. So basically we have language that is given, okay, by the creator. And then we have here the contribution of Krashen pretty much falls into this category, under the derage or the spirit. And then the contribution of Cummins, of social and academic language, pretty much comes into here. And lastly, Halliday, he's talking about the systemic functions of linguistics, and it comes here in the body or the peshat. Let's lay out the main contributors of ESL, English as a Second Language. The starting point is evidently language acquisition, what makes us Homo sapiens, beings of sapiens. This will correspond to our identity as humans, which is this one, okay? Next would follow culture, our reenacting of the creation story. So this is the first, and then we as culture reenact this by learning a second language. The first one is pretty much kind of, it's part of the package deal, of being Homo sapiens. But the second one, well, we have to somehow learn from the first how it happened and then reenact it culturally at the second level. So that's our contribution. Retracing the steps of what makes us what we are, in this case, second language acquisition. So when the first lot of language is given, as we said, thereafter each author contributes to each of the slots from 2 Krashen, number 3 Cummins, and 4 Halliday. Our assumption, and I think it's a fair assumption to make, is that the ESL course by Region XIII, or any other group for that matter, is well structured, well thought out, which should be, all things considered. I mean, they're professional guys and they've been doing this for a long time. They are professionals in their field. Now, this is not to say that there isn't room for improvement. Certainly there is. And that's the whole purpose behind this video essay of ours, to apply the Wholeness Principle and check to see if it isn't broken and to fill in the cracks where necessary. Improve the teaching methods instead of using old-fashioned schematics, to use this schematic, which is it's a schematic as well, yeah, but the C-diagram is much more powerful. It's like a closet of ideas. So we go to the next one, C-diagram of the triad of triads. As we said, the first triad would be this, all right? But this principle in turn can be unfolded. If there's a lot of material, you can unfold it into this triad, turns into the triad of triads. And each of these little slots of the C-diagram becomes a slot unto itself. This will be spirit, this will be mind, and this will be body. But each in turn becomes spirit, mind, body, and so on and so forth. You get the idea. Needless to say, ours is an approximation, ballpark approach, not a final precision work by a long shot. This purpose would require experts in the field in the wider university research community. I mean, all I just did was take a 3-day course, and the first day is pretty much what I'm talking about. So to do a better job, it would require people that spend, quite a bit of their time. But this gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. We'll try to take it a step further in the direction of the triad of triads T-diagrams, or in this context of the C-diagrams of the 3-in-1 triad of triads. So it's a triad of triads, and the C-diagram would be the C-diagram of the triad of triads. Now this is very important. Now we have 10 factors, okay? 3, 3, 3, and 1, that's 10 factors, which begins to look like the tree of life. Remember the Sefirot, or the 10 Sefirot? Once we've made contact with the 10 Sefirot of classical Kabbalah, we are moored to a wealth of concepts from which to borrow. But this is a more advanced topic. For the moment, let's focus our attention on lower hanging fruit at arm's reach. Let's start by following Krashen more closely onto the next level of discourse, the number 2 slot. So we're going to be talking about this slot corresponding to Krashen, to this guy. The abundance of information merits passing from the principal triad C-diagram to the triad of triad C-diagram in order to adequately cover the exposed theory. So from the principal triad, we're going to have to put 3 triads, because it's got a lot of material and we're trying to fit it in. So Krashen's contribution is labeled second language acquisition theory. The usual explanation found in manuals relies heavily on flowcharts. Usually they give you a flowchart, a line, and stuff like that, timeline. It is these that I am transcribing verbatim onto the C-diagram to the best of my knowledge. So I took the schematic, the flowchart from the notes, which is pretty much a timeline, and I've mapped it here in the same sequence, obviously. This is made up of the process in 81 and the performance 82 models. Now let's talk about more closely. The second language acquisition theory of Krashen is provided in the timeline flowchart fashion as follows. It is a typical input, process, and output. Okay, so we have the input he calls it here, and then the process will be all this, and this will be the output. Okay, the beginning, the middle, and the end, so to speak. The pre-start, to call it pre-start, so to separate the cultural human part from the given or the creator, he calls it the comprehensible input. And then the process, properly speaking, the second language acquisition takes off with the affective filter, he calls it here, okay, followed by the intake, and then the language acquisition, and this couples with the acquired competence, and then we move on to the knowledge, all right? Following the process will come the performance model of 82, and by the look of things on the process side, we have the presence of a monitor first, and all the while the process ends with the output, properly speaking. So we follow the timeline given in the notes, and we pretty much map them there. The great advantage of this closet of ideas or of thoughts is that it's neatly packed, like your closet, Imagine living off a suitcase, that would be impossible. That's what closets are for, And the same thing here, this packs it very neatly. Okay, the mappings are as follows. The number 1 given is a comprehensible input hypothesis of language. The number 1 goes here, of language. This will correspond to sought secret, okay? Going back, as always, we go back to the first one here. So this one, as we mapped it, will correspond to the secret, okay? Because it is secret, it is given, You can't say much more than that. This makes us what we are, Homo sapiens, beings who master the wisdom of language. His theory, Krashen's, properly speaking, would then correspond to number 2, the Raj discovers spirit. So we said the part given by the creator is obviously this part, the salt, here, the salt. So Croatians would pretty much be this part. Okay, Croatian would be this, which corresponds pretty much to the Darash. So that's the contribution of Croatian to the second language acquisition. Okay, now while we all rely on visual scaffolding schematics to enrich our verbal explanations, the difference between the Triad PaRDeS C-diagrams and the consuetudinary suspects like timeline flowcharts and the like is that there is a Kabbalah worldview behind the first one dating from the Mosaic creation story, whereas the other ones just happen to work intuitively by chance. It's a hit and miss. All these flowcharts, and as we see later on, the double iceberg and the four quadrants from mathematics and all these different resources that are used, they're intuitive and they work, but it's a hit and miss, trial and error. Whereas this schematic, the C-diagram, comes from the T-diagram, and this in turn comes from the seed of life, which comes from the tree of life. They're actually the same thing, which comes from the creation story, which is T, absolute time equal to 0. So there's a base from this, okay? Whereas all the other ones that you see out there, the timeline, from physics or the grid from mathematics, or the iceberg, from I don't know from where, they are intuitive and, it's good, but at the end of the day, it's better some kind of closet of ideas, okay, of thoughts. Okay, so much for crashing. Next, we move on to comments. Here, the schemes are more numerous and resourceful by the look of things. This seems to be the follow-up to crashing in the process of transitioning from language 1 to language 2. So now we're going to move on to comments on this part, which corresponds, as we said, to this one, okay? Remember, not this one. This is this one, okay? So comments would correspond, as we said, to the remes, okay? That would be the contribution of let me put these things away here. Of Croatian. Here, where are we? Oh, here, Croatian. Okay, so this is the one of comments. Okay, so the comments contribution start with a social language versus academic language distinction. So he talks the social language and academic language is opposite, like the flip sides of a coin. Okay. At the entry level, we are presented with two acronyms. On the side of the social, he calls it BICS, Basic Interpersonal Communication Skills. Those are his scaffolding, theoretical scaffoldings. And on the side of the academic language, he calls it CALP, Cognitive Academic Language Proficiency. Herein, we're told that there's an overlap of CALP in L1 and L2, despite differences like that, flip sides of the coin. Yeah, but they somehow meet at the rim, So this would be the idea of the rim. These are the opposite sides of the coin. That would be the rim. Next would follow, from here we go to here, okay? Next follows the common underlying proficiency or CUP notion. The idea that students can use their metacognitive knowledge and set of skills in their first language to support their work in another language. This idea of bilingual proficiency is represented by way of a dual iceberg image of sorts. Like it's a dual iceberg. Each student, that's a student is the whole dual iceberg, but each language will be one of the icebergs. And the upside of the surface, there's one language, but underneath the surface, there's a lot of common ground. And that's the whole idea, that there's a lot of common ground on which the student can provide information or knowledge from one to the other at the subconscious level, so to speak. So in the CUP provides the student a base for the development of both the first language and the second language. The expansion of the CUP in one language will benefit the student in another language. Lastly, so we go here from the distinction and then the rim of the coin, and then he goes from the CUP, okay, and the language 1 proficiency, language 2 proficiency, and the CUP, the common, the double iceberg, and then he goes in the last part to the four quadrants model. In the following convention of the grids in mathematics, the four quadrants, you have to refer to the notes, but the four quadrants refer to the cycle used to think about language development in a content area class. So he does the XY. On the positive y-axis, he calls it cognitively undemanding or the easy. On the negative y-axis is the cognitively demanding or the hard. On the positive, x-axis is abstract, while on the negative would be concrete. So these quadrants, he calls them 1A viewing, which will be plus minus, 2B doing, minus minus, okay, from the plus plus to the minus minus, and then 3C talking, okay, so he goes to the positive, and then 4D transforming, plus minus. I gather that the sequence is from the easiest, 1A viewing, to the hardest, okay, which is 4D transforming. Let's now see how we fit all these items on the C-diagram for storage in our thought closets, okay? So all these ideas that come by way of the social languages and then the iceberg and the 4 quadrants and all that stuff, we pack it here in this closet of ideas, of thoughts, neatly. For it's a lot neater, okay, than having all these different icebergs, stuff like that, you know, and polar bears, maybe. I don't know polar bears, but just icebergs. Lastly, okay, so this is the Cummings, and we did a triad because there's a lot of material. I mentioned that because with Cummings, his contribution comes under the heading of Systemic Functions of Linguistics, SFL. It's a big name, you know, but it doesn't really correspond to that much. His theory, properly speaking, would then correspond to the Peshat, plain body, okay? So then his theory of this guy would correspond to this one, to the Peshat, which is the same as this one, okay, at the here, okay? So don't get confused with this one. It's at the bottom, but it actually corresponds to this one, okay? So just keep that in mind. Okay, so Halliday's is the study of the relationship between language and its functions in social settings. And there are 3 main stages in his theory. Learning language by acquiring vocabulary, he calls this like apple, you know, manzana, you know, or whatever, you know, pomegranate, and that kind of stuff, you know, I mean, pomegranate, and learning language by acquiring vocabulary one word at a time, you know, and sometimes it rhymes, sometimes it's very similar, sometimes it's really not, you know. Okay, it simply means learning vocabulary by any means possible. And then the second one will be learning through language, okay? So once you know a little language, you can learn more language when you speak that language to know from apple to pear, so to speak. That is, once a student has acquired enough vocabulary, that the student can begin to learn through the language, through the second language. And lastly, we learn about the language, which means students learn and begin to understand grammar, spelling rules, and the nuances of the language. Like when you're in high school, you say, hey man, he's in high school. He's been speaking English since he was, you know, 3 years old, you know, and he's in high school and he's still learning English. Well, he's learning the grammar, okay? He's learning poetry. He's learning a bunch of spelling rules and stuff like that. So nothing wrong with learning about the language. So that's the last stage. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, so SFL is applied in second language learning by making meaning within context. So it's about meaning within context, you know, over route learning of vocabulary, grammar, and spelling rules. So the new school and the old school, so to speak. The new one will be meaning within context, and the old will be just memorizing stuff, you know. Well, this final slide ends the holistic exercise of using the Triad C-diagram to put the whole theoretical construct of Krashen, Cummings, and Halliday on ESL in a nutshell. This comes as an alternative to what we normally go through in PD courses to make do intuitive schemes that do work for the most part, but on a hit and miss, but give the impressions of thoughts stuffed in a backpack for carrying on the trail or living off your suitcase. You know, that can only work for so long. Okay. And lastly, let me give you this last one that it kind of gives. So with Krashen, as we said, we had to do from the triad, the principal triad, to the triad of triads. So we get from this one, we get triad of triads because he had a bunch of stuff. And the same thing with this one, with Cummings, he had a bunch of stuff. But with Halliday, we did the principal triad was sufficient, you know, to get the work of Halliday on the closet of thoughts. So the upside of the C-diagram is that it is the mapping of the triad, which in turn comes from classical by way of postmodern Kabbalah. And all, as we said, dovetails with the Mosaic creation story of absolute time equal to 0, because if you want to get it right, you got to start from scratch, okay, from 0. The obvious downside of this presentation is that I am not a one-man band. I am not a know-it-all, okay? Rather, the point being to showcase that it does work in a first approximation, requiring perfecting on the hands of experts in the field of education theory going forward. So this is an invitation for people who are more knowledgeable in this field to grab this and really make it a PD course that is a lot more, you know, integrated than the one we have right now of a bunch of schematics, all over the place, and no closet of thoughts where we can neatly put our things like we do in our house, and we have things in the closet, maybe when we travel from a suitcase, sure. Yeah, but when we're at home, we have our stuff in the closet. Okay, so yours truly, Ricardo Turullols-Bonilla, and God bless.